Well, welcome to Scaling for Success. I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Tammy. I love the fact that we were connected this year because we share a passion for the entrepreneur and what they are going through as they transition their business. So before we dive in, Tammy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much for having me, Susan. And it was a really great pleasure to get to meet you this year. So I'm very fortunate for that. So a little bit about me. So I started actually in the financial services industry as a financial planner and advisor about 38 years ago. And for the last 10 years, I've been really focusing on family business. And my whole career has been family business, but the focus has been on helping these family businesses prepare for a transition or the founder to prepare for an exit, whatever that looks like. So I ended up selling my financial services practice. And after transitioning part of it to my child, part of it to a stranger, and part of it to employee. So I've been through three types of transitions. And for the last couple of years, I've been focusing 100% of my time at BlueRoots, which is the name of the company, to help families prepare themselves and the business for a transition, whatever that looks like.
And I love that. Like me, you eat your own cooking and
Yes, yes. And
transfer it over.
and it's true because part of the reason why I decided to give up my own first business was because I was at the same point as my clients were. And I was trying to figure it out and I didn't find a lot of help. So for the last 10 years, I've been working through this myself. And then it was like, you know what, I'm actually gonna do this full time and get out of that business and focus. Because as you know, it's hard to be all things to everyone, right? And your time gets split and you're not doing yourself or your clients any favors by not really focusing on their true needs. And my clients' true needs, having grown up with me over the last 30 some years, were in my age group, where we're that vintage that says, what's the next stage look like? I have to start preparing a little bit for not just the transition, but what does my estate look like? And really, it's my job now is to get them prompted to start looking at that and to help them walk through that process.
I love that. It, I want to take a step back and then dive right in. There are many ways to exit a business, some
Hmm.
voluntary, some involuntary. And,
Right.
and the one that we're going to focus on today is specific to the family. And when we do this, and we're talking about family dynamics in a business setting, I envision all sorts of different television movies and shows.
Succession come to mind?
You know what? I was about to say that and I didn't. So, but yes, that one came to mind. When you deal with this with your clients, what do you find are some of the most common challenges that you see?
Well, the most common challenge, because I tend to deal with first to second gen. So first generation really, the founders don't really realize that they're a family business yet. They really started the business to pay the bills and to earn a living. And fast forward 30 years, they now have this business, but they never considered it a business that they were growing to transition. It was just a way to pay the bills. So the first area that, issue that comes to me is that the founders don't know what to do or how to do it or if it's a family business. 90% of the time, and I'm going to say 90, it could probably 99, but I have to go back and look. I'm sure I've had a first generation actually reach out to me, but it's generally second generation who says, look I've been working with mom or dad for a few years. I really don't know what the process is, what they're thinking. I've got siblings in the business, not in the business. Like we really have no idea what's happening. So that's the very first thing is that the focus has to be on second gen because first gen doesn't even think of themselves as a family business yet or the potential to be a family business. So
Well,
there's
that's
not a
an
lot of
interesting
communication.
comment. Yeah.
Mhm.
The first generation, so I want to say that again because that was really, really critical. The first generation doesn't think of themselves necessarily as a family business, and they didn't start it to be a family business. They
Mhm.
started it to pay the bills. And when I talk about the evolution of a CEO and the evolution of a business, these pieces, as you're transferring over to the next generation, the skill sets that either of them have probably aren't the same.
Right, right. Because in my case, and dealing with my clients for the last 30 some years, and again, they're continuing to be those clients that I deal with in this phase of my life, which is the BlueRoots, is that most of the clients left their employer early on. So maybe in their 20s, maybe they're plumbers, electricians in construction, and they left their employer for any number of reasons, but generally it comes back to values, although you didn't call it values at the time. It didn't line up. But they maybe didn't like the way they treated people or the way they treated their customers or how they performed the work. There was something that didn't really, ring true to them. So they end up leaving, starting their own business just because I can do it on the side. My own boss, I can do what I want and I don't have to worry about my employer. But because they're good at what they do, they ended up having to hire help and then hire help and then hire help. So they didn't set out to be a business. They just thought they could do the role a little bit better, as opposed to an entrepreneur who starts and says, I want to grow a business. I want a business and I'm going to grow it and I want to take on the world. Most of the families that we deal with, it was sort of by accident that they became the successful business and they didn't plan for it, so they didn't intend to bring their children in. It wasn't something they talked about as their kids were growing up.
So how do you help them understand that it's a business, it's an asset, it's likely one of their biggest assets.
Yeah.
You need a little bit of runway in order to
Mhm.
transfer and translate that to the next generation and all of the things that come along with that. And then
Yeah.
how do you also, so I'm asking so many questions, how do you also then help the second generation to really step into the role they need to be as the new leader?
Well, the first challenge is to actually get in front of the founder. Because if it's son or daughter who's called and said, I need you to talk to my parents. I'm struggling. I've got an issue. Usually they come to me because there's one problem and they want me to help address that. The first thing we have to do is to be able to get in front of mom or dad or both.
Mm. How
So we
challenging.
have to figure out from Gen 2 what's been discussed. Are they open? Are they expecting my call? How do we get an introduction? So the first thing is to get an introduction to the generation who is the founders generally. So that's the first step. And that, again, depending on the age of the kids, the stage of the kids, that will determine how I get in front of the client. Now, remember back in my previous career, I got in front of them because I knew them, but I was brought because son would say to me, and I or daughter, and I'd have a line open to the founder. But now at BlueRoots, I'm dealing with not my existing clients. I'm dealing with other clients. So it's how do you get me in front of them? Once we talk and say, look, are you open to discussing? We then talk to them a little bit about what we do and how we do it. Generally, they'll go, "Oh, you know what? We've been gonna do this for a long time. It's been on the list. I just don't know how to do it. I've been wanting to talk about it." And that generally starts it. So the key is to get in front of the founder and let me explain what we do and how we can help. So we can find what their pain point is. Generally, as you mentioned, the business is the largest asset, and statistically, it's about 80% of the value of their wealth is tied up in the business. And if you have mom and dad, or two parents, one is generally wants equalization, like I want everybody to be treated equally. And then someone says, well, it just needs to be fair. So what is the difference? And so that becomes an issue. It also becomes an issue when you've got a child in the business and one not in the business, and the child in the business says, well, I don't want my sister or brother or brothers or sisters to be my new partners. Right. So
Mm.
it's understanding. So what we try to do is to explain what we do and to start with understanding the three circle model and the different perspective that an owner has versus someone who works in the business versus a family member. And there can be any combination. There's actually 7 combinations of those. But to really understand that, and that's a starting point, is in order to get engagement to say, well, let's talk about this. And I really haven't had anybody say no once I've been introduced to the founders by the second gen. because they really want the business to be, I mean, they put their heart and soul into this business.
It's another family member, right? It's their
It's the
baby.
favorite child, let me tell you. It's the favorite child. The firstborn, the favorite child. I should know. Ask my own kids, they would say absolutely.
Love it. Okay. Well, that does bring up a lot of challenges and a lot of very interesting dynamics. I mean, it's one thing to deal with parents when they don't have a business and it's not something to transfer over, and you have those different dynamics of, well,
Oh, yeah.
brother should do this, sister should do that, or whatever. Sibling one wants to do X and sibling two wants to do Y. But now, how many times do you find that there are siblings in the business and out? Are they all in the business? Tend to just be one in the business?
Um, I would say 80% of the time, they're in and out. It's not, I would say 20%, and again, it could be high, are all in the business. And it tends to be, depending on the industry the industry it is, whether they're in the business or not. But generally, there's a combination. I'm working with one family right now that there's four siblings. Two were in the business during this process, three. Now one is still outside. One, there's seven children,
Oh my.
and two are in the business. So, and it becomes very complicated. And we really start that whole process with communication. It really comes down to understanding each other because, sorry, I got like a hair or something that's driving me nuts here. So apologize for that. We start with communication because the biggest issue we found with families is for those who are not in the business, they tend to say, well, I can't work with my parent. There's no way I could work with my mom or dad, or there's no way I could work with my brother because they drive me nuts. So the first thing we try to do is to have them understand each other a little bit. And we use a couple of tools for that. One is called Kolbe, which is the how you do things. And the other one we use is called PRINT, which is the underlying motivator of why you do things. So how you do things and why you do things. So Kolbe is how, I don't know if I said why, but how you do things. And PRINT is why. So when you layer those two together, it gives you a clearer picture of your siblings and an understanding of why they do what they do. Why are they constantly asking questions? Why do they never actually follow through with anything? You know, it's all these great ideas, but they never do anything. They're like, yeah, 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 yeah. So it's really, and that has been a a big breakthrough because we used those in my old company and we used them for years and we used them when we hired. So our teams were very strong. We had really good um, long-term employees. We also understood each other's strengths. Although your strength might drive me nuts, I realize that I need you in order to move the business forward. And so there's a better understanding. And I just thought to myself, why are we using this with families? Like, why don't we start there? Because they're still a business, but they're a family. So why don't we do that? So we tend to start the very, very beginning before we even get into the three circle model is we do those assessments and we talk about that to make sure that they're comfortable and understand each other. And I think that's really a key point in bringing the family a little bit together and better understanding. Still might not want to work with them, but at least you understand why you don't want to work with them.
But that is a very interesting point. And I never thought of it in that perspective in terms of, yes, it's still a business, so why don't we check on this and see who might be a good fit? See why one child may not want to be in the business. I can't work with mom or dad. Maybe this helps to shed the light and then guide the path forward that says, well, maybe actually I could if,
Absolutely.
and let's see if we could do this. Do you find when you have these conversations about Kolbe and PRINT that they tend to lead towards the insightful pieces that go, okay, well, the future, as it opens up the conversation, the future could really look like this?
Yeah, it really like the we use when we use these assessments, we actually give each family member a card, a tent card that sits in front of them. So every time we have a meeting or every time we're on screen, it comes up to remind each other who we are. and you talk about what the strengths are, and you also understand where the goals are and what their sort of life goals are, what their business goals are, and how they fit together. And that is the starting point for any conversations. Then you start going into the business, looking at the three circle model and understanding the perspective from each person, but also then looking at opportunities. So you might say, well, I can't work directly with mom and dad. However, I'm very interested in maintaining this legacy because it comes down to the founders at this point, what's the legacy they want? And they may
Mhm.
not be ready to exit. They may never exit until death occurs. The bottom line is you have to have an exit plan. You have to have an exit plan ready at any point in time. But what can happen is that, okay, I can't work with mom or dad directly, like in an office every day with them. However, I'm very proud of this company that I've created and I want to be part of it. But maybe we can open a new division because this is my strength and this is how it aligns. Or maybe I can open another office in a different location. Or maybe I can bring this into the business. But it's understanding and getting all the generations to understand each other and where their strengths are. So by understanding how they communicate and then also understanding the different generational differences. So there's so many elements that go into being able to work together and not work together. But sometimes it's as simple as, you know what, we have a store in this city and I want to open one in this city because I've learned from you, we'll meet in the middle, but day to day, we're not in the same office together. So there's a lot of ways to actually make it happen, but the hardest thing is communication. And I'd love to get into the succession group and actually do Print and Kolbe with them so that they understand each other. So, but
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be very good for a TV series if everything was just fine, right? And I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that understanding who you are. And really, it's about understanding who you are, but then knowing how other people react as well. Because you can prevent some of those reactions by understanding what triggers you. She constantly does this to me, so it triggers me. But if you go, okay, I know she does this, so here's how I'm going to deal with that. I'm not going to let that bother me because I know that's just who she is and we're going to get by that, like if you're talking to your mom or your sister or whoever. So it's a matter of understanding that, but then going into understanding the three circle and then go deeper and deeper and deeper. So you sort of start at a very high level, and again you're coming down to mission, vision, and values of both the family and the business, right? And when you don't have one, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Like,
Basic core principles of running a business. Too
and
true.
if you're a founder who started because you just loved stonework and you want to have a stonemason company, or you now have this multi-billion dollar, you know, um, food franchise or something that, there was something that started that got you in there, but you didn't intend to grow it this way. And now how do you sort of transition it? Because you never really thought about it, never thought about how to exit or what your vision was. Your vision wasn't to grow this massive company, it just happened. Where an entrepreneur who starts out says, I want to run the world and I want to, like, what was it, Microsoft, I'm going to put a computer in every house in the planet. Okay, well, that's an entrepreneur as opposed to I just like to fix computers. I just like to tinker with computers. And most of the family businesses started out that way and again, we deal with first and second gen. So first generation just tend to start a business to pay the bills. So the focus wasn't on preparing that business with a vision, a mission, or values. You have them, you just haven't defined them, right?
You
Because
may not have communicated them back to the family.
no, because you probably left your first employer because you didn't share them. But you didn't know what it was at the time. You just knew that you didn't like working for that particular company. And now that you're experienced and skilled at your trade, you can just go and do it on the side. And then you just grow the business. And that's primarily what's happened with the bulk of our clients is they're very surprised at the size of the companies now and the complexity that comes with a bigger company, but also even more complex is how do you bring in the next gen, or should you? Or should it be part of it? Like there's so many different options. We could have a whole podcast, video cast just on options and how to even talk about it. But the biggest issue is just getting them to talk as a family and share as a family.
One of the things I've always found interesting in the workplace is the multi-generational communication styles.
Mhm.
And your first generation to second generation, if I was to guess, I would say they are either boomers or the great generation, and probably they're going over to Gen X. Do you find that there is a very substantial divide there in communication styles?
Absolutely. There's also on the way they approach things, how they were raised, what influenced their growth. So it becomes, very difficult and what their discipline. I mean, think about a lot of boomers, because youngest boomers now are 60, right? So there's a lot of age that, and the millennials, believe it or not, are their youngest millennials are 30.
Wow.
They're 30 to 42. I think it's 42. So it's big, right? There's a huge gap. So some of these are even um, Gen Xers, right, who are transitioning. So a lot of them are boomers, but a lot are Gen X who are 60 and saying, I have to start thinking about this. Or their kids are saying, you have to start thinking about this. Because there's so many things that can derail the plans. It doesn't have to be just a death. It could be a disability that causes it. It could be just you're tired, you're burnt out. There's so many reasons why you might want to exit. And you just have to have a plan in place in order to make that easier for the next gens. But part of it is as parents, and I can tell you this having lived through this, as parents, our kids are our kids. And we have a hard time seeing them as the adults they become. And again, same thing in my business with the transition to my son. It was very hard for me not to tell him what to do and how to do it. And part of that reason is because when I started the business, it was different. There was no computers, there were no cell phones, there was a phone book. You knocked on people's door. People picked up the phone because there was no caller ID.
Yeah.
So how I started the business and grew the business is not the same as how he does it. So it's understanding that you can't do it the same way. And we're like, oh my God, think of it like this. When you say, oh, call me, we do this, right?
Yeah.
When the kids do that, they go, call me, or, like there's no this, right? So just the way they interact is different. What we have to embrace is that younger generation are the ones with the ideas and they're in tune to what's happening today. And we have to embrace the fact that we can't continue doing what we've done. We have to get different perspectives. Now, I used to say this to my husband all the time. You know what? My 30-year-old son says something to me, and I think of it as a kid, a 30-year-old person who walked into my office who was not related and gave me that same advice or information, I would look at it completely different
Mm,
because he's not my child. I don't know anything about him, but my child, I think of him as when he was 7. It's very difficult. So that was a hard thing for me to do is to understand that. But I did see that with working with so many families. So I did have that knowledge and experience to see what happens in family businesses and how they treat their children as opposed to a stranger. So it's very interesting. So yes, absolutely. We could have a whole talk just on generational differences and
good.
why they are the way they are. And it's our fault, right? As the parents, we're the ones that created the monsters.
Do you find that it's hard for a lot of the first generation to let go to the second generation?
Yes, but it's not necessarily to let go to the second gen. It's to let go, period. Because they're not ready to let go. They're not prepared to let go. And again, I think, and this is what's different with the next gen coming up or the rising gen, is they don't want to work 24/7 like they saw their parents do, right? They saw us as never being home and they don't want that lifestyle, right? Which is part of the reason why it's different. But Oh my goodness, I forget the question. What was the question?
We were talking about letting go. I was
Oh,
thinking
letting go.
about an arbiter that I had that came over, and
Right.
he was a second generation. He was like, oh, they finally stepped away.
Right. So what happens is they've worked so hard, their heads are down, they've worked nonstop. They have had no outside interests. So to walk away from the business is, what am I going to do? Like, I don't have a plan. My plan really was to pay the bills, and I didn't expect to be 60 or 70 years old and having to figure out what the next phase is. So that again is part of the work we do, is to say, what are your interests? Like, how can we get you to be focused? It's not going to happen overnight. But the reason they won't transition is they won't transition to anybody. It's not just the second gen, it's to anybody, because they're not ready to let go. I've seen many, um, I have seen many families be ready, all prepared to transition, and then all of a sudden, the last minute, pull the plug because they'll find a reason
Mm.
not to do it, because mom or dad is just not ready to let go. The business might be ready, but they're not ready. So it doesn't matter who it's to, if it's to their family or to a stranger. They're just not prepared, either financially on the outside or personally. They just don't have anything to go to. And you sort of go through that. Well, what would you want to do? Maybe it's another business, because a lot of times if someone leaves a business, they go and start a new business, like
Mm.
I did, right? And it's like, I'm ready to let go here, but I'm not ready to let go work. I love what I do, and my work has evolved over the years, and now I'm here. Or people will take their hobbies and make it into a business. So most of the times that it doesn't transition, it is because the founder is not prepared to exit at all. It's not the second gen that's the problem, it's them.
That's a hard thing for a lot of founders to hear.
It's true. They know it. I mean, if you just think about their hobbies and what they do and how many hours they're at work every day. Now, it might be just make work at work,
Yeah.
or, because they don't want to leave. If they've created a successful business that can run without them, there's no reason they can't transition. But again, they won't let go because they've nothing to let go to.
It's their entire identity in a lot
It
of
is
ways.
their identity. And that's a problem. When you wrap your whole identity up in your business, so your business is who you are, that becomes very difficult to walk away. And it takes a few years to get these families in a different position. Like the one I just worked with, I shouldn't say finished, I still work with them, but the transition took 4 years of just preparing dad to be able to walk away. It took
It's a
four
hard thing.
years to prepare him. He wanted to, in one sense, but he didn't have anything to go to. So we spent 4 years working on things that he loved to do and had no time, but to try to work on how to do that. He did have time. He just didn't make time. It was an excuse. And so finally, he was prepared to let go. And he's happier than all get out. But he was not happy for 3 years of that whole transition of trying to figure it out. And like I said, it took 4 years, and he's happy. So it's not overnight, like, oh, go pick up golf. You can golf 4 times a week. And hey, what else you want to do after that? Like, you need other things to keep you occupied and to be interested in. And you don't have to give up work. Maybe you volunteer. Maybe you like I said, turn your hobby into a little business. And so yeah, it's not the second gen, it's really just anybody.
Have you seen, there's been a lot of changes in the last few years from the pandemic, post-pandemic world. Have you seen how that had any impact on the ease of the transition? Oh, I'm just done. This thing has changed. I just want to give it away. Obviously, I don't want to give it away, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
those
you do
those trends
sometimes.
are very, very different.
Just
Yes,
take it off
exactly.
my plate. Um, Actually, it's more interesting that it's the employees who have more exited than the owners. But the owners are frustrated, concerned about what happened during that time, and maybe the industry needs to shift or the way they do business shifts. So again, part of it is you started a certain way, you followed that same path, and the pandemic was a way to have you, and I hate we're using that word, but pivot. So they pivoted very quickly and had to, which in a lot of cases renewed energy, right?
Mm.
Because now it's like I'm back at like I'm finding something new, and you have to bring in additional talent or tap the resources of your family to help you. So not so much the pandemic, but what's triggering now is the age, right? The age. So if you look at statistics, something like in Canada, 60% of family businesses will transition over the next 5 to 7 years. And in the US, it's something like 75% will transition. It's incredible numbers. So I think it's age more than the pandemic. Although I think the pandemic brought it to the forefront, but nobody wants to sell their business when they're in the middle of a pandemic or in the middle of a restructuring, because who wants to buy a business that A struggled or is just trying to find their new footing,
Well,
right?
and
So,
that's what we find too. It's really important to have as much runway as you can. You've got to plan
mhm,
from the wealth management side for the owner,
right.
be able to properly address things. And then for maximum valuation to move forward, however it is you want to move forward, whether you're assuming that it's going to be family or something happens to that plan in the end.
Yeah. You really, in order to exit, you really need three things, right? You need the business organized and of good value. You need to have financially, you need to be prepared for that exit. And personally, you have to be prepared for that exit. So there's three elements that you really have to focus on in order to be prepared to exit the business. Um, all of them have to be in line, because if you're ready to go and financially you're okay, but the business is not ready, then that's again not a great value. Although you might say, well, it's okay. I can survive. But in a lot of cases, it's one or the other. The business isn't ready, or the owner's not ready.
And both of those take time.
Both of those take time. The key is to be prepared. As soon as you start your business, be prepared for your exit, because there's nothing stopping a business coming to you, a purchaser coming to you and wanting out right away. But again, you need to be, again, if you're early and your kids are young, that's fine. But if your kids are older and you haven't talked to them, that's time to have that conversation and talk about here's what's on the table. Here's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Because we tend not to talk about that until they're adults. And in some cases, it's too late because they're off in their own career. Although we do encourage, as parents, we encourage them to do whatever they want. But do they know what the opportunities are? And do they really understand the business? You
In a
know,
lot of cases, when I've had conversations, and I know my daughter's a little bit younger still, what do I actually do if I ask her that? Well, I don't know. You sit behind a desk.
I know. My son used to say, all dad does is go to work, read the paper, and drink coffee. But what you can explain is what you do for your clients and who your clients are and how you help. So it's much easier if you have a restaurant or a manufacturing plant or something where your kids can come in, they can sweep the floor or work in do dishes or something where it's easy. But if you're in an industry, you're a lawyer, an accountant, a planner, how do you show them? You can't, but you can talk about what you do and how you do it. And I think that's what the key, that we should start to talk about it a little bit more of how we help the clients that we help. If you're a lawyer and it's estate planning, if it's in, corporate, whatever, it's about understanding. If you are, um, a family business advisor, how do you do that? If you're a wealth manager, what do you do? You manage money. Well, what does that mean? How does that help? What are you doing? I'm a financial planner. What does that mean? Well, I help people plan for their exit, help people plan for all the things that happen over their lives, you know, buying their first house, having children, putting them through school. I mean, explaining all of that as opposed to, yeah, yeah, I sell life insurance. How do you tell a 10-year-old you sell life insurance, right? Like, so depending on your industry, say, I help people. Here's what I do. And I think that's the way we have to, as founders, change that and get that conversation going, because it will maybe intrigue your kids to ask more, or to say, you know what, we do this and it helps a lot for charitable giving. Philanthropy is, I help families build, you know their systems for philanthropy or to like whatever you do, if you can explain that more in the title rather than just the title that you hold, but how you actually do it, I think that would help bring at least inquire more about the family business and just not even the least bit interested.
And
Like I'm
that's what I was thinking too. If you can spark that conversation as you move forward, they'll have a little bit more understanding and appreciation that, okay, well, I wanted to go be an accountant, but I went over here. Well, mom and dad are doing this, but I could have been an accountant in your firm if I understood it a little more. That would have been a different mindset as I was growing up.
mm, yeah, or exit strategies or business valuators. There's all kinds of things that with a business or social media. Think about this today. You know, when I started my business, social media wasn't around. Social media wasn't around till just a few years ago. And I'm like, I still don't know what it is. I mean, honestly, I don't run it. I know we need it, and somebody in my company runs it for me. But what if your child loved that marketing, social media, but you didn't have that person? Well, if you want to move to the next level or grow that business to be able to bring in your whole family, maybe you need to grow the business because it's not big enough to sustain, 3 kids coming in. Well, what can you do to grow it? And start to bring in their talents and strengths and say, look, tell me how we can use this to better this business or whatever they're doing. Right. So there's lots of opportunities. There's lots of roles that didn't exist and lots of roles that don't exist anymore because of technologies. Technology is a huge thing, from cell phones and video calls. Like this was the best thing to ever come out of COVID was the ability to have video calls with people who are all over the place. You don't have to have face to face. And this would have taken years to adopt because again, I didn't grow up with this. So this is not, wasn't something that I would have put in the company years ago. And I know we had it because we had lots of meetings, but we never thought of doing that ourselves. It was all in front of a client. If we were gonna go to Ottawa, we're there for a week and we're meeting with clients. If we're gonna go to Toronto, we're there for a few days, we're gonna meet with clients. Now I can meet with a client in Ottawa, can meet with one in Toronto, I can meet with one in Singapore. I met with a client this morning in Singapore. I'm not in Singapore, but I can have a call.
You sure
Right? So there's lots of things that change that we need to embrace, and there's lots of roles that are no longer there. And it's about explaining and really talking to your kids about the opportunities or your vision comes back to vision or what their vision is for the business.
which is an interesting question to ask them,
Mhm.
without a
Mhm.
doubt. Well, Tammy, we are at the end of our time today, but this has been great. We have so many little nuggets that we really could do a whole separate conversation on. I do want to let everybody know that there will be information and links in the description of the video. And so you'll be able to reach out and talk to Tammy because I really appreciate the fact that there's somebody doing exactly what you are doing to focus in on that transfer of the values, the business, the succession, and really help all of these businesses. We don't want these trillions of dollars worth of businesses to go away.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, but I encounter people every once in a while and they say, oh, well, my business isn't worth anything. I can't do it. I'm just going to shut it down. When really, there are other options and possibilities.
Mhm. And what you forget, I think what a lot of people forget is family businesses are the backbone of the economies around the world. They are the largest percentage of GDP in all countries. And we forget about that. Like you think of the big families as the Walmarts, but there's a lot of mom and pop shops that keep the economy flowing. And looking in your community, how many times in your community are we so upset because a business shut down? We're like,
Correct.
oh, now we got to go out of town. There's nobody there that sells that. We got to go out. That's part of the problem, right? They didn't do the planning. So we want to keep businesses in our community.
That is so critically important to think
Mhm.
ahead, to start with the end in mind, as crazy as that sometimes sounds, to
Yes.
plan for the unexpected because it can happen at any point in time. And you want that continuity. I love it. Tammy, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for taking the time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.